The year is 1890, and in a small Victorian home in Philadelphia, a young woman tucks her daughter into bed after a long day. Her grandfather, at the age of 95, has passed away from natural causes.
Okay, it's time to go to sleep, Rose.
Wait, I want to hear about Grandpa.
It's too late. Go to sleep, child, before the battle axe of a woman gets you.
The grandmother, who has been standing outside the door listening, walks in.
Excuse me, you lunkhead. What did you call me?
Oh, Mother, I didn't see you there.
Grandmother, will you tell me why Grandfather was always talking about some war and had that weird uniform in his closet?
Oh, sure.
No, I will tell you about the War of 1812.
Nonsense. Let me tell you about how America took the egg.
Oh, Lord, here she goes.
It all started way before the year of 1812, when those British tyrants began bringing in more trouble.
They were stealing our ships and even American sailors.
The French were in it, too.
Oui.
Hush, child.
The mother and grandmother begin telling the little girl about a time in history that caused a divide between the British, French, Americans, and the Native Americans. They tell her about the occupation of Detroit, where American General Hull surrendered Detroit without a fight. British General Isaac Brock allowed most of Hull's militiamen to return home, but kept the rest of the army troops and took them to Canada as prisoners. With this capture, the Michigan Territory was declared a part of Great Britain, and Shawnee Chief Tecumseh was able to increase his raids against Americans in the frontier area. In 1814, William Hull was court-martialed for cowardice and neglect of duty in surrendering the fort. He was sentenced to death. However, President Madison remitted the sentence.
France and Britain had tension, so when France began to support American troops, the British were upset and began to cause trouble. This tension between France and Britain only increased, causing the Napoleonic Wars.
Wasn't the name of the man who ruled France Napkin or something?
Napoleon, not Napkin. I swear you are your father's child. It's so obvious you're a DeWitt.
Anywho, these wars lasted from 1799 to 1815. After the French Revolution, the rift between Great Britain and France would only hinder the United States' neutrality, as trading with one another would mean conflict with the other.
Rose's mother and grandmother attempted to explain the major causes of the war without completely confusing her.
Now, this was just the tip of the iceberg, Rose, and the United States did try to ease tensions to prevent war, because believe it or not everyone wanted war.
That's for sure.
Wait, so what did we try to do to avoid war? Were they successful? Did they all fail? What did Great Britain do? Was Napkin somehow a part of this?
Patience, young grasshopper. All your questions will be answered.
Except about whether you're adopted or not.
Mother.
I kid.
Sure, Grandma.
Now, America did try to ease tensions. For example, George Washington announced in a proclamation of neutrality that the U.S. will remain neutral between the conflict between Great Britain and France. Also, in 1807, Thomas Jefferson tried to pass an embargo act on Great Britain.
What is an embargo?
It is a ban on trade with another country.
This was not successful at all with American merchants, but the United States would later prohibit trade with Great Britain and its allies through the Non-Intercourse Act.
Rose was learning so much about the War of 1812, but she longed for information about her grandfather. She still wanted to know what his time was like leading up to the war. Rose sat up in bed, fully awake and ready to fire more questions.
Wait, so where's Grandpa during this time? What was he doing?
Oh yeah, I almost forgot about that old raisin. Well, he would have been in his mid to late teen years, as he was only 20 when the war started in 1812. We met only a year earlier, and it was a tough time leading up to the war. Both of us weren't very financially stable, and times were tough. However, your grandfather was a strong nationalist and was very intent on serving his country.
Even before the war, he would get in physical brawls over people and country with Native Americans.
Oh yes, that brings me to my next point about the natives.
I will tell it. The conflict with the Native Americans causes a lot of uneasiness between the U.S. and the British as well.
Rose glanced at a sketch from her grandfather of a young Native American boy who was around her age. He had given her the sketch about a year ago and told her to never treat someone differently because they look different than you. This confused the young child because she couldn't understand how different backgrounds and skin colors could cause so many problems.
Why did they cause more tensions, Mother?
Well, Rose, this war meant much more for the Native Americans than it did us. For them, this war was about independence and freedom. Your grandfather knew that, but still defended his country at the end.
Lord knows why.
The conflict with the Native Americans created more tension because they teamed up with the British to defeat the U.S. and protect their tribal land and people. Americans also believe that the British troops in Canada were telling Native Americans to cause conflicts with the Americans.
Oh, so the Native Americans also just wanted to protect their own and what they cared about.
I guess you could say that.
This brought a new understanding to Rose about her grandfather's sketch and the War of 1812. However, Rose was curious as to when she would be informed about the actual war.
Alright, I'm exhausted. I need to take my teeth out. I'm going to head to bed.
No, I need you to finish telling me about Grandpa and the war.
Fine. You children are going to wear me out.
Getting to the actual war, there was a series of economic restrictions by the British and the French. This pushed the U.S. closer to war. Then, dun dun dun, the imprisonment of American sailors began by the British.
Sailors. I once had a thing with a sailor named Arthur and...
Mother, quiet.
So what is imprisonment?
This is the taking of men into military by some kind of force.
Poor Arthur.
Not only that, but these orders in council were a cause in that they declared a blockade of American ships when they reached European imports. Another cause was the attacks by Native Americans that were believed to be the work of British troops. During this time, your grandfather became more skilled at farming and fishing.
By this time, we were together and soon to be married.
Back in the early 1800s, not only was Rose's grandparents' relationship young, but so was the United States. Before the war, the U.S. only had 7,000 people in their Navy. This was a stark contrast to the British, who had around 250,000 people in their nation's Navy. While the U.S. didn't have the numbers or equipment, they had prior knowledge of the land. These advantages and disadvantages were evident throughout the War of 1812.
So the war had begun, and your grandfather was quick to join the war effort.
There were so many battles, and that old bat fought in almost every single one of them. He got injured more times than you can count, literally.
Hey.
Nevertheless, the first naval battle was the USS Constitution versus the HMS Greer. The USS Constitution was commanded by Captain Isaac Hull, and the HMS Greer was commanded by Captain Dacres. The British captain was sure they would win and reportedly said, "There is a Yankee frigate in 45 minutes. She is surely ours. Take her and I promise you 4 months' pay." However, when they were only 25 feet away, Hull called to open fire and Captain Dacres was forced to surrender. This would ensure support for the war effort from New England.
I think I've heard of that battle. Grandpa would go on and on about it.
Tell me about it.
Then there was the Battle of York.
I know that battle. I remember when Grandpa told me about this battle. This was an easy win for America, and they captured Fort York and forced the British down to Kingston.
Exactly. Then there was the Battle of Chrysler's Farm. This began when the Americans launched a two-pronged assault on Montreal led by General Wade Hampton and Major General James Wilkinson. The lesser numbers and unorganization caused the Americans to retreat. The battle ended in a British victory that ended any hopes of success for an American attack on Montreal. Both forces suffered heavy casualties.
Don't forget the Battle of Queenston Heights.
Alright, the Battle of Queenston Heights was the first major battle of the war, and it ended in a British victory. On October 12, 1812, the American Army hoped to capture Queenston so they could cut off British supply. The battle gave Upper Canadians new hope in the British cause and unified the population.
So where is Grandpa in all of this?
Well, he was one of the American soldiers, and one of the very lucky soldiers at that.
Especially in the Battle of Lake Erie, where he almost drowned.
What's the Battle of Lake Erie?
Well, on September 10, 1813, during the Battle of Lake Erie, American commander Oliver Perry struggled to find enough ships. The nine U.S. Navy vessels were able to defeat 6 British Navy ships. This battle ensured our control of the lake for the rest of the war.
Geez, this is a lot of fighting.
That's because it's a war.
Anyways, I digress. During the Battle of the Thames on October 5, 1813, the American Army under William Henry Harrison took back northwest forts. British ally Tecumseh was killed, leading many Indians to stop fighting. The Americans continued to march into Canada, where they were able to capture and burn the capital of York.
Was Napkin there?
There was also the Battle of Horseshoe Bend, which occurred on March 27, 1814. This is where Andrew Jackson gained notoriety due to his alliance with the Cherokees. Together, the Americans and Cherokees defeated the British and the Creek Indians, ending the Creek Resistance. The Treaty of Fort Jackson effectively ended the war, and the Mississippi Territory was open for pioneer settlement.
Let's not forget the Battle of Bladensburg. On August 24, 1814, the Battle of Bladensburg took a destructive turn. The White House was set on fire along with various public buildings. General Winder believed that D.C. needed to be defeated, so he tried to do so. This defeat, along with the destruction of D.C., depleted American morale. This battle helped usher in the conclusion to a frustrating war.
That's not all the battles, is it? What about the Battle of Fort McHenry?
That's definitely not all the battles, and yes, I was just getting to that, girl.
Well, go faster. You're talking slow.
Does respect your elders mean nothing anymore?
Nah.
Carrying on, the Battle of Fort McHenry on September 13, 1814 was inspired by the British success in Washington, D.C. They intended to capture Maryland, hoping to cripple the American war effort.
That's all the battles we have time for tonight, Rose. Just know that your grandfather fought hard, loved his country, and lived for many years later.
While many battles had been fought, there were still many major events, promotions, deaths, and acts that Rose's mother and grandmother didn't speak on. Rose began to close her eyes and go to sleep. And just when her mother and grandmother thought they could finally sneak out, she asked another question.
I still need to know what happened after the war and how it affected grandfather.
After the war, there was an economic growth for the U.S. and a famous Navy officer named Oliver Hazard Perry that won the Battle of Lake Erie. The end. That's over. Time to sleep.
No, not the end. Grandmother, will you tell me more about the War of 1812? I feel like some information is missing.
Might as well. I'm not going to be here much longer anyways. Well, there was the Hartford Convention.
This happened because they were not happy with President James Madison.
I'm sorry, is your name Grandmother?
Anyways, the secrecy of the Hartford proceedings also contributed to discrediting the convention, and its unpopularity was a factor in the demise of the Federal Party. This was the end of the Federalist Party.
Oh, we almost forgot about the Battle of New Orleans.
Yes, that battle had a great effect on patriotism in the United States. The Battle of New Orleans was a battle in which Andrew Jackson led a diverse militia with the purpose of protecting New Orleans from British invasion. The victory was followed by a peace treaty, although many thought the Battle of New Orleans had won the war. Andrew Jackson's victory elevated national pride, which had been punctuated by a number of setbacks during the War of 1812.
Then finally came at the end of the War of 1812 in the year 1815. I was 21 and your grandfather aged 23. I came out of the war with fresh red badges of courage. The British had ran out of supplies and more troops never came. This led to the signing of the Treaty of Ghent, which officially ended the war.
The conditions included that all conquered territory was to be returned, and commissions were planned to settle the boundary of the United States and Canada. Although the treaty did not refer to the reason why the war started, it did open up the Great Lakes area for the U.S. expansion.
And your grandfather lived his days as a strong patriot for the United States and a small ambassador for Native Americans. He struggled sometimes with the darkness of being in war, but continued to live a long and happy life. Soon your mother would be born, along with her 7 siblings, your aunts and uncles.
Okay, it's time to sleep, Rose. No more storytelling for you tonight.
Thank goodness. Get me out of this dorm room.
Good night.
The mother and grandmother leave the room, ready to hit the sack. Rose mulls over what she has learned, holding a new respect for her late grandfather, his tales, and even that dusty old uniform in his closet. She finally closes her eyes and goes to sleep. The years following the war are known as the era of good feelings. After the war, the Federalist Party lost credibility and eventually was disbanded. Many of its former members joined the Republican Party. Americans were celebrating the fact that such a young country had gone up against the greatest military machine in the world. Another gain from the War of 1812 is the respect and recognition that the U.S. got from other nations. Many Native Americans lost their land due to westward expansion. As for America's economy, cotton played an immense role in the bread making. American patriotism was immensely fueled by the War of 1812. America proved that although being a fairly young country, they proved that they could hang with bigger nations. America earned recognition and respect due to the war. The War of 1812 is a big part of America's history.